Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish, and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I am Mark Stan. A huge thank you, as always, to our academates in the Bestseller Academy and our patrons over on Patreon. And we have a clutch of new names this week, Mr. D. A big thank you to Danny Edwards, to Claire Hanscom, and to Jacqueline Dispenza. Thank you all so much for your support. It's much appreciated. Do come in, settle down, put your coats in the bedroom. We're going to have a little podcast party here, and we can all chat later on.
Fantastic. And thank you as well to our academates as well. All of you folks keep this podcast on the road, and we are so grateful to you all. There are hobnobs for everyone that joins us. Virtual hobnobs.
Say that. Virtual hobnobs.
Virtual hobnobs. It'll feel, joining and supporting this podcast is the equivalent of winning a year's supply of hobnobs. That's what I think. Keeps you going.
It's going to get very expensive. Some could sue us for hobnobs. Lifetime supply.
Oh my goodness me. Excellent stuff. How are you, Mr. Stay? How's life been this week?
It's been good. It's been very good. It's been busy. I've finished the edit on Ghost of Ivy Barn, which is the next Witches of Woodville book. So that's gone off to my editor, who confirmed she received it, and it's now going off to the copy editor. So I've got that to come next, which will be good fun. And I've spent the last couple of days polishing a short story and recording the audio version of it, which by the time this podcast goes out should be live. So it's a new free short story. It's a Witches of Woodville short story, but it's one set 2,000 years ago during Caesar's invasion of Britain, of Kent, frankly, invaded Kent. And we got very upset about that and sent him packing. So it's a short story called Caesar on Wattling Street. And Wattling Street is one of the oldest roads in Britain. It runs from Kent right through the country. It sort of slices across the belly of the land. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. We even did a book about it at Orion. It's amazing. Wow. It's amazing.
That sounds like the Canadian highway that runs all the way from the east coast to the west coast. It's ridiculous. It's like
was
one
it
road.
Built by the Romans, eh?
Well, possibly not.
What have the Romans ever done for us? The aqueduct?
Hang on a minute. You said you recorded the audio. That's a bit of a step down from having Julie Walters do your last one. I would have thought maybe Judi Dench for this one, possibly. Or
You know what? The irony is, the protagonist of Caesar on Wattling Street is an Irish woman. So I could have really done with Julie, whose parents were Irish. She does a very good Irish accent. Instead, you're going to have to put up with mine.
Did you actually do it? How did you decide to do an accent? Because this is always
a very light accent.
A very light. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Very I'm not going to do it here.
No, we'll have to get. Oh, there you go. So you have to get the audio book too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
nice.
all you got to do is sign up to my newsletter, and there's about 5 or 6 stories already there that you can. There's the Miss Charlotte quartet. There's a whole quartet of stories there. There's all sorts of good fun stuff.
Absolutely.
There's a recipe for jam roly-poly. What more could you possibly ask for?
Oh, absolutely. And the reason we talk about all the things that Mark's doing in his world of books is just to reflect like what you could be doing as well, folks. I mean, why not do your own audiobook? I mean, short stories in particular, I wouldn't probably recommend doing your audiobook if you've written a 90,000 word novel. No. That could be a struggle. Although a lot of people do it, don't they? Especially in the non-fiction world, I've noticed a lot of authors like to read their own books, but I can't even imagine how many hours. I mean, it's never going to be like a read through. There's going to be retakes and messing up, coughing.
I find that I get wind. I get burps.
That's not a good thing.
I get a bit burpy because I sit here with a glass of water.
Yeah.
And I'm reading it. I have it as big as it can be on the screen, and I use my Apple Magic Mouse to sort of scroll through, and I'm reading it. And because I'm taking big breaths and I'm pushing on my diaphragm, and every now and then I have to stop recording, lean back, and go burp.
Well, it's kind of an unusual thing, I guess, having to do that amount of, and it's a focus thing. When there's a psychological thing I always found when I record female or male vocalists, but mainly female because I tend to work more with females. As soon as I turn on the red light and the record light goes on, their throat constricts
and
they can no longer sing the notes that they could sing in the shower or in warm up. In fact, you know what? One of the biggest tricks of the trade in producing music, producing vocalists, is you start recording and then you say, okay, can you do your warm ups? Can you just run through the track a few times like warm up? Yeah. Those are always the best ones. And the minute you say, right, we're going to actually record now, it's like they get a boa constrictor around their neck and they can't sing because there's pressure, like vocal cords get tight. So I'm sure the same kind of thing happens when you're recording. Not for us anymore because we're total pros, aren't we? Used to say at the podcast. I mean, look at us. Just turn on the light and we're off and running, making it all up as we go along.
There's the story, one of my favourite songs is Reeling in the Years by Steely Dan, and there's a guitar solo at the end of that, which I think is by Jeff Skunk Baxter, which is astonishing. Just blistering guitar solo. But they all say the rehearsal was better. And they never recorded, and ever since they always record the rehearsal. And you find same thing happens in film. They'll, especially with digital now, because you're not worried about footage of film, actual celluloid film being used up. So they, always shoot the rehearsal, always shoot that first take, because what used to happen on film sets as well is you'd hear the film going through there, and you'd tense up thinking, oh no, precious footage film, I better get this right the first time, and then you screw it up, whereas now it's kind of they can keep the camera running.
Yeah. Now on computers, when you're recording, you have a tiny little red light. When you walk into a BBC radio station,
it's like red alert on a submarine, isn't it?
It's like red alert on a submarine. It's like, if you're not worried yet, wait until you get inside the room. It's like there's a big red light outside the room and you walk in through this massive door, vacuum shut. And then you go inside and there's just this big red light on air. And if there isn't something to like make you more nervous on your first ever radio appearance, it's that light.
Well, I always take notes in with me. And because I haven't done it for a while, but because I usually, if I do anything with BBC Radio Kent with Dominic King on BBC Radio Kent, I usually pre-record it now. But I used to go in live every sort of 6 or 8 weeks or so to talk about stuff. And I would have the book open and I'd even write down Dominic's name. Because you just know that if you blank and you can't even remember his name, so Dominic King, and I'm talking about this, and I would just have things that I could just glance down and go, oh yes, my name is Mark Stay, and I've written a book called The Crow Folk, just in case I forget the name of my own book, which if you blank, you blank.
Totally happens. Totally happens. Yeah, if you even stop to think about how many people are out there. Even on like a local BBC radio, I used to do a lot of radio on the BBC, and it used to go out to the entire southeast of the UK, which was like massive audience. And if you even stopped for 1 minute to think, if you were actually sitting in a room talking to all these people, you'd be like in Wembley Stadium. Like you just freeze up. You'd be like, oh my God, did I really just say that? But it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? Fascinating. But I think it's very interesting. Before the show, folks, Mark and I were talking about guests we would love to have on the show. We were going into nostalgia world. I think that Christmas special, Mark, we did where we talked about our favourite Christmas presents. It started something off in me about looking back nostalgically over our youth and childhood. But what we're going to start doing is we're going to start approaching some authors who were kind of icons of our past. We won't reveal who they are until probably they're on the show, but a little challenge from me and Mark. We're going to have a little list going, but I'm going to put it out there to everyone out there as well. We've never actually really asked this, and I've always wanted to create a list, Mark, of almost like a vote for an author that we haven't had on the show yet that you'd most love to have, because I'm kind of curious to who of all the listeners, like who's the number one author, who's the top 10 authors that people would most love for us to kind of chat with. So maybe we'll get that set up at some point. But if you want to start the ball rolling, pop over to our Facebook group or Twitter and say who you would most like to have on the podcast. But some rules, folks, some rules. Number one, you can't vote for yourself. You can't get your friend to vote for you because we'll know if you do. But give us the reason why you think they should come on the podcast, and maybe we'll send out some little emails. Just sprung that on you, Mark.
Just to say, we have asked Stephen King. We have asked Stephen King. We have asked Neil Gaiman. We will continue to do so. Don't worry. They're on the list.
Yeah, they're on the list. They're on the list. But yeah, it's fascinating. Do you know the thing that absolutely blows me away, Mark? I don't think we've ever talked about this. Every time I go into a massive bookshop, and I bet you do the same, I like to scan a wall and go, yeah, they've been on the podcast. They've been on the podcast. But the thing that blows me away are how many people, like how many authors that haven't been on the podcast, because there's so many of them. Like if you go into an average bookstore, there are just, I don't even know. I don't think in our lifetime we could probably interview every single best-selling author out there in the world. Do you think? I don't think it's possible.
No, of course we can't. Of course we can't.
How many authors? So here's a question: how many authors are there out in the world who are, either bestsellers or have had a certain degree of success? I'd love to find out that number.
Oh bloody hell! I mean,
that's
how many have you got?
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah,
do you think?
Yeah.
A million?
Easily. I don't know. I don't do numbers. I told you. I do words.
But it blows me away. It blows me away every time I go I look around. I'm thinking, gosh, there's maybe only 2 or 3 people on this entire section, of whatever it is, fantasy or, crime. And it's just mind blowing. So yeah, brilliant stuff. Anyway, Mark, talking of authors, let's dive in and let's give a little sneak preview as to who we've got on the show today.
Well, this is a returning guest. Speaking of, so Veronica Henry was on episode 126. So do check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes to that. But she's a Sunday Times best-selling novelist. She's also worked in TV and radio, particularly on The Archers as well, after getting kicked out of university, which she talks about a bit. She's won awards. She's won R&A Novel of the Year, all sorts of wonderful stuff. But she's got a new novel called The Impulse Purchase, which is about a mother, daughter and granddaughter who buy a pub. And we discuss, among other things, challenging old cliches, finding your voice, and why you should love the world that you are creating.
Fantastic. Let's dive in and listen to Mark chatting with the lovely Veronica Henry.
Veronica Henry, welcome back to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, good to go. It was beautiful on the beach this morning, but it's now not so great. So I timed that right.
Perfect stuff. Excellent stuff. Now, we're here to talk about your new book, The Impulse Purchase, in which a trio of women buy a pub. And I think I read somewhere on the internet, so it must be true, that after the frontline services of the police, paramedics, firefighters, all of that, running a pub is supposed to be one of the most stressful professions there is. And I know that when you did Night on the Orient Express, you took a trip on the Orient Express for research purposes. So I'm hoping for the same spirit you got behind the bar for this one. What's your pub experience like?
I've worked in pubs and bars and restaurants, not recently, I have to say. And I do have quite a few friends who are in the hospitality business. So I do know both sides of the bar, if you like. Mostly this, the customer side these days. But yeah, it's not something to be taken lightly. And everybody has that sort of, not everybody, but, one has the fantasy of running the archetypal English, quintessential and English country pub. But, people do it. And that's what my heroine decides she wants to do, because the pub's on the market and it's, going to be sold to a property developer. And she thinks, no, not going to let it happen. And she's 69 at the time, so it's pretty drastic and brave.
No, it's a terrific premise. Now, how much of the real world would you fold into? Because obviously the hospitality industry has had a horrible time the last couple of years. Lockdowns, not lockdowns, all of the. It's been an absolute. I know our local pubbers. They've been very innovative. They've kept their head above water, but I know not everyone's been quite as lucky. So, do you fold the real world into that? I mean, this is an ongoing debate in the industries. Do we put COVID into our stories? Do we shy away from that? Do we pretend it doesn't happen? How is that? What decision did you come to with that?
For this particular book, I decided to ignore COVID completely. Everything was so uncertain anyway. Whatever I'd written, the future would have been different from what I'd pinned down. So I just thought, no, I think people are going to want normality and comfort at this point. They don't want my heroines sitting there going, have you washed your hands and have you got a mask on? And oh dear, are we going to have to do takeaways for the next 6? I wanted normal. It's hard enough running a pub without throwing David into the equation, and I felt the challenge was sufficient and more interesting, really, because they were actually able to do what they wanted rather than stop, start. So I just took the decision early on just to pretend that COVID doesn't exist.
Yes, I think we'd all like that.
Yeah, exactly. So a world which we would all love to be in, basically.
The setting for this, we've got a pub and we've got a wonderful village as well. When did that come into it? Was the pub the thing that triggered the idea, or was there something else that got you writing this one?
What triggered the idea was I saw a review in one of our local papers or magazines of a pub in Somerset somewhere that was run by a mother and daughter team, and I thought, oh wow, that's great. That's a bit different. I loved the idea of two generations getting together, and then I decided to that inspired me, and I decided to take it one step further and make it a mother, daughter, and granddaughter team, which was great because I'm really interested in how the older generations and the younger generations kind of feed into each other these days. The young ones are listening to the wisdom of how the world works, and then the older ones are kind of tapping into whatever TikTok, that kind of thing. And I love that relationship, particularly the grandmother granddaughter relationship. It was really fun to write, and also I just felt that age group, the sort of, say call it 70, traditional retirement age when everything's supposed to be winding down. And I just know so many women of that age who are really dynamic, still very involved in life, still working, still running businesses. And I just don't see them reflected on the telly in that way or in books in that way. Grandmothers, 70-something women were very often still portrayed as a bit dowdy and a bit frumpy and a bit sort of traditional granny-ish. And I thought, no, I want to rock it. I want to shake that up. And so Cherry is amazing and wears skinny leather jeans and is on it.
Well, this is the thing. Our punk rockers are pensioners now, aren't they?
Exactly. When you think of all those, and they're still, wearing biker jackets and
why not?
Behaving badly.
And as you said there, that the grandparent and grandchild dynamic is really interesting because they both have a mutual enemy, which is the one in the middle, the parent in the middle, which is always fun to play.
Exasperating middle person. I think it can be a really strong and lovely, because as a grandparent, you don't have all the responsibility that a parent has. So you can be yourself without all that annoying nagging and worrying and pestering. It's quite a pure relationship, untainted by that's a parental responsibility, which is, we don't always want to be the nag as parents. I think grandparenting, a lot of my friends are becoming grandparents and really loving that experience. I'm not there yet, but it's interesting to watch and note.
Rushbrook, I did a quick bit of Googling. I don't think Rushbrook is a real place. It's fictional.
It's fictional.
So how do you build a village from the ground up like that? Is it a kind of greatest hits of villages that you've been to, or?
Oh, that's a really nice way of describing it, actually. That's perfect. Yes, it's and as with all of my books, wherever I've created is usually a mishmash of places I visited, distilled into the perfect, whether it's a beach hut or a clifftop house or indeed a Somerset village. So yes, Rushbrook is kind of that village that we all want to move to. And I'm particularly interested in Somerset because it's become very much the in place for people from London to move to because it's so accessible. It's 2 hours on the train. So it has had a lot of what they call DFLs, deep down from London's. And I was interested in the impact of that on a village as well. These people swanning in and thinking, oh, yes, I'm going to paint everything, sage green and take over. And the locals aren't always that impressed. So, it's just fun. I love all of that sort of slightly social comedy, a bit like The Archers, if you like.
Yeah, it's funny. I live on the Kent coast and they have DFLs is the same thing. When we first came, they said, are you DFLs? We said, no, we're AFSs. We're across from Surrey.
That's very good.
I think this is your 21st novel, I think.
Do you know what? I think it's my 20th technically, but I have written. So I've written some digital only books and a quick read, for example, which bumps up the sort of overall backlist. But yeah, I think it's the 20th full novel.
Are you getting the hang of it by now?
Wow, here's the thing. In a way, but it's not easy. It's the same fears and worries and dilemmas and tortures, as anybody who's listening probably recognises, are still there, even after 20. Yeah, of course, I have definitely found my voice. I definitely know what my readers want. And I have a sort of, I wouldn't call it a formula, but I know the rhythm of my books and how they work, which of course are based on very, traditional storytelling arcs, if you like. So, I'm comfortable within that framework, and I'm not trying to do anything revolutionary. And sometimes I mix it up a bit. I quite often do 2 timelines, but I'm not going to do anything, to upset the apple cart particularly, because my readers do expect a certain read. But yeah, you are starting from scratch every time. You have to find a story. You have to find interesting characters. You have to find something that propels you through 90,000 words, at least. And that is a massive challenge. And I always say to people, it's not supposed to be easy. I don't know why people look for a way to make it easy, actually, because it's kind of insulting to suggest that it should be easy. There should be blood, sweat, and tears going into that work to make it perfect. If you just get up and write and think, yeah, that'll do, then that's not good enough.
It's funny. My edit just came back from my editor yesterday, and I've had a look at it this morning, and it is that thing of, you'd think I'd have learned by now. It's just, here we go again. It's fun. I enjoy the process. I enjoy the problem solving, but you're right. It doesn't get any kind of, every time I won't make the same mistakes. I'll make all sorts of new mistakes instead.
It's also going to be new mistakes because it's an entirely different premise, an entirely different plot. The tensions are different. The points of view are different. And that's why it's such a great relationship, the editor-writer relationship. If you get a good editor who really gets what you're doing and understands your voice and your aura, if you like, but then can put a fresh perspective on it. And, sometimes, I don't know about you, sometimes I just go, no, I'm going to fight for that. Or...
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Go away and think, why isn't that coming across in the way it should do? I sort of go away and ask, why has she made that suggestion or objected to that? What's behind that? And then I find my way of fixing it. I don't like being told how to fix it, I have to say, because that just doesn't work in the way that I work. It can't be said, if somebody said, oh, change that chapter and cut that and just put in that they do this, that doesn't work for me at all. I have to go away and work it out for myself.
Yeah, it's I think it's a Neil Gaiman quote that goes around online, which is, don't listen to the fact that there is a problem, but don't listen to the fix.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's basically what I was trying to say in far too many words.
I'm completely misquoting and paraphrasing him, but it's the kind of thing where you go, okay, they don't understand this one thing here, but it's usually something 2 chapters ago, or something someone said, or just one word you might have changed, or whatever. So
exactly, or very often it's tone. Sometimes I might go a bit dark, and my reader. It's not that bad things don't happen in my books, because of course they do, because otherwise it would be, if it was all lovely, 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 there wouldn't be a story. But sometimes I just tip over into sort of slightly too dark, and then I have to sort of put a touch on the tiller and lighten it a little bit, or find a way to make it, less downbeat, if you like. And when you're writing, you get so absorbed into it that you can't stand back and see that as so that fresh pair of eyes, and they're coming to it as a reader would, is absolutely essential. So anybody that thinks they don't need editing is, fine. Good luck.
Good luck with it. A touch on the tiller. I like that. I think we found the title for this episode.
Touch on the tiller, or a complete about face. Yeah, it can be a touch on the tiller, or it can be I've had to cut 40,000 words before. I did that with, I think it was A Wedding at the Beach Hut. I had a sort of backstory strand, and at the minute I delivered it, I thought, that's not going to work. I know that the notes that come back from that strand, I know what they're going to be, and I know that the best way of fixing it is to cut it because I didn't want to compromise that story particularly. And I just emailed my editor and went, by the way, before you read this is this has got to go, which was pretty brave, I think, because it did involve a lot of work. And that's when experience does kick in, I suppose. And I guess I was second guessing, and I knew deep down. So, but it's a draft process, isn't it? You've kind of got to get it wrong to get it right, I think.
Absolutely. I think of the editorial process as failing a little less with each pass. Just trying to make it a bit better. And let's talk about that experience, because you worked as a script editor in TV and in radio as well, I believe. So you spent, a great deal of your sort of formative years as a writer looking at other people's writing, looking at, things that didn't quite make sense or things that could be fixed. That must have been incredibly helpful as a sort of a basis for starting a career.
Enormously. I mean, I did go to university, but I got thrown out. That wasn't hard enough. So then I went to what I have now called the University of Ambridge, because my first job was typing Archer scripts. And that's, so I was thrown straight into the world of storytelling. And that's when I realised that everybody needs an escape. We all need to switch off. And I was utterly beguiled by the whole notion. I was 20. I didn't listen to the Archers. But the minute I got into that world, I was like, wow, this is just lovely. Everybody really wants to, immerse themselves in this fictional place. And we typed them on typewriters. That's how long ago it was. And the writers would deliver a typewritten script. And then William Smethurst, who was the producer editor at the time, would red pen it. So he'd cut things, he'd rewrite things, he'd put new dialogue in, he'd swap scenes around, he'd cut scenes off earlier. So it literally was the University of Ambridge. I was learning how to tell stories and how to sharpen dialogue and how to make sure that the listener tuned in the next day. I mean, it was absolutely crucial. That episode ending had to be a cliffhanger to make all of those people turn onto the radio the next day. So it was the most brilliant way. It was better than going into any writing course. I was incredibly lucky. I learned from an incredible person. He also taught me that stories aren't just about huge things. They could be about tiny little things. And that's when character comes into it. So I can remember one week, the biggest story was who had stolen the over 60s tea money. It just kind of reverberated through Ambridge, and everybody suspected everybody else. And it was just the sweetest, loveliest story, but so great because it reflected everybody's character. Do you think it was Walter Gabriel? No, it can't possibly be Walter, but is it, because he's, not so well off. I can't remember what the actual plot was, but, it was just a really, really, really clever way of getting everybody's personalities on the air.
We talk about stakes a lot because we have an Academy for Writers, and we talk about this on the podcast a lot and on our Facebook group. And it doesn't have to be an asteroid ploughing into the earth. It can be something as simple as, the thing that is most important in your character's life, the thing that's going to get them through the day, that little straw that, breaks the camel's back, that can make all the difference. These things, as you say, it all comes down to character for something like that, doesn't it? And there's a real knack to getting that right as well, I think, particularly with series characters, because there's a lovely familiarity to series. When you watch a show and you think that character's always going to do the wrong thing, and you can, surprise that, invert that, all that kind of stuff. That's great fun to play with, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and it's a moral dilemma. You can't beat a moral dilemma or something that questions their integrity. I think that's always good if you're testing the strength of their personality and kind of pushing them into a corner and making them think, oh, do I do the right thing? Do I do the wrong thing? Absolutely. Just testing, I guess, is the key.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about finding your voice, which is something that took me a very, very long time. And certainly if you're working, as a script editor, there's a big focus on character and storytelling and cliffhangers and all that good stuff. But finding your voice when you're writing narrative fiction that can be really tricky. How long did it take you to get that? Was there a kind of an aha moment where you thought, okay, this is me. I'm not pretending to be someone I admire or whatever.
It's really interesting, and I think social media has made it that more difficult because everybody is so very much looking at what everybody else is doing and working out how they can get that success. And I think that's the point at which you lose your voice. I know that my first book was 100% me. It was completely, I wasn't distracted by anything else. I wasn't thinking, I had people who I admired and wanted, who sort of, like Jilly Cooper, for example, whose work I loved and would love to have emulated, but I didn't sit down and try to write like her. But I knew that my mind worked in a similar way. We're both a little bit naughty, and we love that world of that Cotswoldy kind of, that social comedy. So with my first book, I was 100%, and people would read it and go, "Oh my God, it's just like listening to you." It's like you're reading to me. And I don't know how, and I think sometimes I've tried to write in a different way or go in a slightly different direction. And I know that the minute I've lost my voice, then that's it. But it's really hard to, I don't know how you get that, except just to be yourself, I guess. And play to your strengths. And, the worlds that I'm writing about, I know those worlds really well. I understand the people that are in them. So I can write that with confidence. It's confidence as well, I think.
Yeah.
Confidence in the world that you're moving in, because they say write what you know, don't they?
Yes.
And I don't always agree with that. I think you can do research and not necessarily have been a policeman to write a police series, but you definitely are writing with more confidence if you know what the procedure is, for example.
I think write what you know is some of the most misconstrued advice. I remember a teacher telling me that, and I was like, well, I'm 14 years old and obsessed with Star Wars. So I mean, what can, but I think it is about that thing of discovering who you are. That's what it's really about. Write what you know really should be. Speak with your own voice, speak with show the world through your prism, and try not to be anyone else. So,
so for example, in the impulse purchase, there's a pub quiz. Well, I've done many pub quizzes, and I know how those work, and I know the competitive table that want to, that really want to win, and I know the sort of smug people that just kind of sweep in and set up the competition, and I know the person that's going to get pissed and fall off the chair at the end of the night. I know how that all works, and I have fun with it, and I think that's kind of finding your voice, isn't it? Knowing what you know about.
Yeah.
And having fun with it. Do you know what? That's the key. I think it's to love what you're writing, to really love the world that you're creating. It doesn't have to be fun. It can be a dark world. But I think if you love it and you care about it and you're interested in it and you understand it, that's when you find your voice.
Absolutely. Brilliant stuff. It really does. It really, really does. And you spoke earlier about over time you've discovered what your readers want from your books. And how much is that in your mind when you're writing? Do you ever kind of have to, you spoke earlier about maybe going a bit too dark. Do you ever kind of stop yourself and go, maybe I shouldn't do that? Or do you kind of put it in anyway and experiment with it and see if it works?
Yeah, I mean, I think now, I keep that tucked on the pillar as I go through and kind of recalibrate as I'm working through it. And I do have that safety net of knowing that my editor will tell me. So I know that I know it's a draft process. So, it's not like I'm publishing it to the world when I press send. I know there is a safety net.
Yeah.
So, but one has to be conscious. And that's when I think things like your Amazon reviews can be really useful. And you see what's coming back, not just positively, but negatively too. If you have a negative comment that's come up more than once or twice, you really need to pay attention to that. So if people are saying, "Oh, there's way too many characters at the beginning and I just didn't know what was going on," you need to think about that. If people are saying, "Oh, the ending was too predictable," then you have to think, right, okay, I need to work a bit harder on making my endings less predictable.
Right.
Happily, actually, recently I've had just really nice reviews. They're all really sweet and lovely at night, and just saying. And I think it's a bit zeitgeisty. I think it's because we've all had such a horrible time, and it is quite a cozy, lovely world that they're escaping to, and a big, strong sense of family and friendship, and it's not cozy, but it's a nice place to be. I think, and I think that's very encouraging.
It's life affirming stuff. Yeah.
So for now, that's what I'll write, because we do want that. It's still very unsettling, isn't it?
Absolutely. What's coming next from you, Veronica?
Next book set in Paris, which is very exciting because it's somewhere I love, and I do have a secret fantasy of going to live in Paris, which has been completely trashed by the word Brexit. I would just have loved to have taken an apartment in Paris for 6 months just to see what it'd be like to live as a Parisienne. So it's kind of inspired by that notion of a woman of my age just going, right, I'm off. I'm off to live the Parisian dream. But I can't tell you any more than that. But it's kind of like, it's my fantasy in book form.
And why not? Why the hell not?
You like?
Exactly. Write what you know, but write what you love as well.
Yes, exactly. It's about manifesting it. So this is my way of manifesting my Parisian life.
Well, folks, the impulse purchase is out there to buy impulsively. Just do it. Don't even think about it. Just grab a copy right now, and you won't regret it. As well as Veronica's 20 or so. We've lost count. We've simply lost count of how many wonderful stories you've written all the time, and everything you've given back to the writing community as well. So thank you so much for that, Veronica, and our absolute pleasure, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Absolutely. Good luck too.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. I like the fact, Mark. I do like the fact that Veronica decided not to go with a COVID-based background in her book. It's kind of refreshing in some ways, isn't it? Because I'm starting to watch shows on Netflix where everyone's wearing masks all the time, and I'm thinking, oh, really? Like, we can stick with fiction.
Yeah, I think it's a choice that you have to, if you're writing contemporary fiction, or even if you're writing something set slightly in the future, whether or not you do make any kind of reference to it. And if you do make a reference to it, then how much of it does it affect your plot and your world and what the characters are doing? The easy choice is just to go, no, sod it. I'm not going anywhere near that. Let's leave it alone. So I think we're going to be seeing a divide, actually. It'd be interesting to see how many authors we talk to throughout the year writing contemporary fiction who decide to go with it or just ignore it. And, and also what's happening in the world this week as well, the terrible situation in Ukraine. And, there are all these world striding events that we can either choose to lean into or just, ignore. And I think that affects the focus of your novel, So, I mean, I guess if you were like a thriller writer in the early 2000s, if you're kind of a Tom Clancy style, thriller writer dealing with political stuff, then there's no way you could avoid 9/11, And if you're a cop writing about, police procedurals here and now, I mean, you can't avoid what's happened with George Floyd and the whole Black Lives Matter movement. It's interesting that the writers of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is a series focused very much on the police, and it's very funny and lighthearted, and they had to stop, and I think they had to completely rewrite, shows that had already been scripted in order to say, we have to change our tone on this. So, if you're writing something about, I don't know, families, then obviously, as we discussed last week or the week before, I think we were talking about, we've all been affected by COVID one way or another, some sadly more than others. And, I think depending on your experience of that might affect how it affects your writing.
Yeah, and it's actually a very interesting decision that writers have to make, because on the one hand, I know, and we've had this experience as well, where we reference kind of events that were happening whilst we were writing back to reality. Some people said, "Oh, I got this book. I wanted to get away from all that stuff. I didn't want to read about that." So some people want to escape from it, and others love to kind of meet it head on. And I think it can work either way depending on the reader. And the other thing that I think is fascinating is, whilst we're in it, like whilst we're in the middle of all of this, the COVID or these wars that are happening, it's so huge in our world. Like, it's completely affects everything that we do, especially like when we look at how over like the length of time that COVID has kind of gone on and how things still aren't back to kind of what we'd think of as normality. But really, that's a blink in the eye of the universe over someone's lifetime or several generations. So I think the challenge is that it can really timestamp the book, and it can date the book in a good or a bad way. It can date the book saying this was a point in history and it's a really important thing that happened to humanity, and I'm including it in my book. Or, hopefully 5 years down the road, people are like, oh, another COVID story. Yeah, been there, done that. And it's a kind of a turn off for them, because it feels like, oh, that's so 2021, or that's so 2020.
Yeah, yeah,
so it's a hard one. And I don't really know what the best route is. And I guess every author just has to make their own decision on that.
I guess the other thing is we're still in the middle of it. I know we all pretend that COVID is over, but it's not.
I know.
And I know certainly the situation in Ukraine is far from over. And there might be there might be people, like say 2 or 3 years down the line, listening to this going, oh, you supported Zelensky, but what about that time he dropped a nuke on everyone? You just don't know how it's all going to turn out. It's still unfolding. It's still giving us nightmares, and we have no perspective on it other than that kind of rolling news that's depressing us all. So it is very, very difficult to take a position on it when you're still in the middle of it. So I kind of appreciate that Veronica's not diving into it that way.
Yeah, in some ways it's probably easier if you want to include it once everything's kind of finished, so you've got then that perspective on it, and you kind of know how things panned out.
It's like, when you read a newspaper, you can only discover what's happening in the now. But, when you read a book about the subject, so a book on the Falklands War is going to have a much greater perspective on it than, what was in the daily newspapers then, because they've sat back, they've looked at the whole picture, they've looked at different perspectives. So, that's the difference to me. I think so thank God I write historical fiction at the moment. I don't have to make that choice.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One of the other things that I found really interesting that Veronica talked about was this idea of saying that it's not meant to be easy to write a book. And it was actually really refreshing to hear that, because I know what she means when, some people kind of want to go into this and find it just a beautiful process that just flows from the first word to the last. And we know that in reality, that's never really the case. And it's nice. It's great to hear kind of this honesty of, actually, it's not meant to be easy, and it's meant to be challenging, because challenges are things that help us grow ultimately as writers. And it kind of made me think of an analogy of like a mountain climber. Like, if you were a mountain climber, you wouldn't go and just want to scale a 10-foot wall. That wouldn't help you in any way whatsoever.
At my age.
Well, exactly, right? But the point is that there's, it's about finding that challenge whatever your capability is today, what's the hill or the mountain that you want to try and climb up? And then, of course, when somebody's done that, what do? They don't go for an easier one. They go for something more challenging, and they kind of maybe build their way up to Mount Everest or something, like the pinnacle of their lifetime achievement. And in some ways, if we look at book writing like that, I think it could really change the way we embrace it, rather than get really bogged down with, oh, it's such hard work, it's such a slog.
Well, it comes in gradations. I mean, when you're writing your first book, the challenge is to finish that book and take those 80, 90, 100,000 words or whatever and have them make some kind of coherent sense and tell a story that's a story of change and is, moves people. That's the first challenge. Then when you write books 2, 3, 4, 5, and whatever down the line, then you're presenting yourself with other challenges. Even if you're writing a series, you're thinking, well, I mean, this is the thing I've got with book 4. I've started work on the 4th Woodville book, and I'm touching on subjects that I don't think I would have touched on in the first book or the second book. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be hard writing about this. This is, to do this justice, I'm going to have to dig deeper than I have before. To do, if I'm going to make this work, I'm going to have to be a better writer than I have been before. Mm-hmm. And it would be very easy just to repeat and do the same old thing again. But I would get bored writing that, and I think the readers would get bored reading it. So I think, once you're into that, third or fourth book in a series, you're thinking, okay, we've got to not just up the ante in terms of the story and the stakes, but up the ante in what you're doing as a writer. Can you touch on subjects that might be more complex than before? Can you go to places that you might not have dared go to before? And that's what floats my boat at the moment, just thinking of, okay, right, yeah, I've done this in that one. Do we dare do this in the next one? And it's exciting and it's scary, and it's a bit, am I going to get through this? And that's what sort of keeps me coming back for more.
Yeah, I think it does help to feel a little bit daunted by whatever you're tackling, because it means that you're kind of moving outside your comfort zone. And when you move outside your comfort zone, you either run back into it and say, oh, that wasn't a very good experience. But the bravest of brave people stand their ground and let the comfort zone grow around them. And that makes your world bigger. It makes you a better author. It makes you, more worldly in some ways in terms of your experiences. So I think it's a really important thing for people to recognize. And it was really refreshing hearing that kind of perspective.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the bolder and braver you are as a writer with each progressive book, I think the better you will become as a writer, because by stretching and pushing yourself, you will fail. You will get things wrong. Things won't work out the way you wanted. But, failure is how we learn. Getting things wrong is how we kind of figure out how to make things right, which is what second and third drafts are for as well. That's the other thing.
Yeah. And it's for people who are actually just struggling with their first book or thinking of writing their first book or kind of stuck somewhere in the middle of it. I think it's also important to recognize that idea of progression chapter to chapter. That kind of idea of book to book can also be relevant to people who are, by the time you get to the last chapter in your book, you're going to be a different writer to when you wrote the first chapter, and you'll see that there's been a progression of, challenges that you've hit along the way and breakthroughs that you've made. And then when you go back to it, when you start on the second draft, you're the new writer that's starting from the beginning again, and kind of leveling up everything to what you've achieved towards the end of the book, maybe. So, yeah, interesting. I like the idea of kind of climbing a mountain. And the other thing that Veronica talked about as well were principles that she's learned. I love this idea of as you become more and more proficient and wise and worldly, and have more experience of writing books, you kind of start to develop your own principles, things that always are solid, that work for you. And I think that's the benefit of an author who's been at this for a while and been doing a lot of books, is that you can start to get that perspective of like, these are my set of rules that work for me, things I've tried, some I've discarded, but these are always solid things that help me. And it's interesting to hear that, she still has these kind of story arcs, which are, borrowed from, the great storytellers of our time. but how she has her own principles that she kind of always sticks with. You must find that with your work as well, I guess, Mark.
Yeah, and it has to constantly evolve, I think, too. You know, you develop these things. You go back and listen to episode 1 of this podcast. I'm not that same writer at all. The writing has always evolved and mostly through talking to you and authors and our patrons and people in the academy. You know, everything I've done in this podcast has helped me become a better writer without question. And yes, you do get these sort of bedrock ideas that maybe, but you know, you go back to episode 1. I was a big outliner, as we all know. I'm not now. You know, I'm not now. For me, it's been much more about thematic ideas and characters and journeys of change and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think as long as you allow yourself room to evolve as well, which Veronica clearly does, then that's fine. I think the minute you think, right, this is it, got it sorted, these are the rules, I've got it all figured out, that's when you get stuck in a rut.
Yeah. Well, we're always changing. We're always learning. The only constant is change, ultimately, throughout our whole life. We're never going to stop learning new things, even on the day that we lie on our like deathbeds. We're going to be like learning something that morning or evening. I mean, it's just like crazy in some ways. So I think really for me, it's about having that openness and philosophy of knowing that we'll never learn it all. We'll never truly master something. We'll become near masters, hopefully, and proficient at writing. But it's that having that kind of humbleness to say there's always something new that we can learn, and that will always make someone a better writer down the road. Now, also the other thing that really jumped out, which I loved, was this idea of these 3 generations of women in the story. What a brilliant idea! Well,
this is why Veronica's a bestseller, I think, you know, because she can write about these generations in such an appealing way. And of course, you pick up that book. It is a classic Mother's Day book, but of course, a mother can read it, a daughter can read it, a granddaughter can read it. They're all going to recognize themselves in there. And I know a lot of authors are thinking, well, if I'm young, how do I appeal to older readers? Or if I'm middle-aged, how do I appeal to younger readers or whatever? So, you know, if you have a good spread of characters, then there is something for everyone. I mean, in the Crowfolk, we've got 3 witches. One is young, one is middle-aged, one is about 500 years old. So, you know, that 500-year-old market is big for me. It's very, very big. So yeah, being able to appeal across that spectrum is really, really key, I think. So, you know, which is, but if you find a niche, if you discover that actually I'm really good at writing 48-year-old men, 49-year-old men, then go for that. And if that's your market, figure out what they like and write for them. But I think if you want to, appeal to as many people as possible, then having a good spread of characters is really going to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also putting them in what you might think generally is a relatively unusual situation. I mean, I've never heard of this before. I've never heard of like a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter like buying a pup. So it's that idea of like taking classic kind of maybe family generational ties, but putting them in an unusual situation where I'm sure all kinds of shenanigans happen. So that's a bit of it's a real genius move in that regard, because I guess no matter what situation you put them in, the characters will still interact as they would do between each other. They just give them all kinds of issues to deal with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, it's why Veronica does so well. She takes these ideas and always gives them a fresh spin. There was a period when working in publishing where it seemed like every novel that was in kind of contemporary fiction was about 2 generations, a mother and a daughter, and there was an inheritance. It was about a house. There was always an inheritance and a house and an inheritance. It was like, oh, for God's sake, perhaps something different. But when you've got something like that, where you've got you can take those characters that appeal to that sort of sector of the market and put them in, because Veronica Henry, she's put them on the Orient Express, she's put them in a pub. This is giving these ideas a completely fresh spin, which is always fun. I mean, she did the Beach Hut books as well. Just taking those characters and putting them in a really appealing thing. People have always dreamed of getting a beach hut, and there's a waiting list, years long, and it's having that kind of fulfillment of a fantasy for that market as well.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Well, thank you so much, Veronica, for coming on the show again. We really appreciate it. It's been absolutely fascinating as ever. And Mr. Stay, social media, what's been happening on social media this week?
Well, we mentioned Jacqueline Dispenza at the top of the show as one of our patrons. Well, Jacqueline has got a book and it's out, and it's called The Shadow Dreams by J. Dispenza. And she dropped us a line. She said, the book is now live, a neophyte psychic, a horrifying premonition, a battle between destiny and those gifted few who can change it. High school has never been so rough. And she said, special thanks to the 2 marks and the 200 word a day challenge. It really works. And I said, congratulations. And Jackie got back. She said, thank you. I've been listening to the Bestseller Experiment and all the amazing guests since the beginning. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your words carried me to the finish line on this project, and I'm already 3 chapters into book 2. So Jackie, huge congratulations on that, and thank you so much for your kind words.
Brilliant, Jackie. Well done.
And speaking of kind words, I got a copy of Steve Gowland, again, a member of Patreon supporter and member of the Bestseller Experiment Facebook group. The 3rd book in his trilogy, The Soul's Abyss. He sent me a copy, and he put a lovely little note in here. First of all, he put on the jiffy bag, to Lord Stay. So I appreciate that. Thank you. That immediately got opened before anything else. So that's always nice. And he said, this book, Darkness Falls, he says, marks the end of part 1 of The Soul's Abyss. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you. I'd never have completed 1 book, let alone 3, without the inspiration of the Bestseller Experiment podcast and the wisdom of you and Mr. D. Thank you sincerely. So Steve, best of luck. Folks, The Soul's Abyss, book 1. Go grab your copies over. You love your fantasy. You're going to love this. The Dark Realm, Coven of Shadows, and Darkness Falls. And inspired by the podcast.
Brilliant. Darkness Falls, book 3. Well, congratulations for getting the trilogy done as well. That is a milestone that no one can ever take away from you, Steve. You're going to, the rest of your life, you've done it. It's absolute massive achievement. And I know this is the thing I love about people like Steve. When they've broken through and they've achieved something they never really thought was possible, you're now sitting at the top of that mountain. But you know what, Steve? Do you know what you see at the top of that mountain? You see the next mountain in the distance, right? And it's a bit bigger. But the point is you couldn't see that other mountain if you weren't sitting at the top of this mountain. And that is what life is all about, folks. It's all about pushing yourself and trying the things that you maybe thought weren't possible, and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, and then building the strength and gaining the experience to be able to look at that other mountain and go, do you know what? I might just give that a go. And the thing is, when you do, this is when all the crazy stuff starts to happen, right? So brilliant, Steve. Thank you for those lovely words, but also, more importantly, thank you for inspiring people. And we say this all the time, but it's true. You know, through the actions that you do in your life, you inspire others, generations to come as well. And your books are out there now for everyone to enjoy. So fantastic.
Climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow your rainbow till you find your dream. I am available for Panto. Right. If you want to get in touch, drop us a line. We are at bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there, or find us on Facebook, Bestseller Experiment, or Twitter and Instagram at bestsellerxp. And if you've enjoyed this show, if you've been inspired by the show, if this show has made you think, I want to write something, I want to finish something, I'm in the middle of something, I want to carry on, give us a rating, give us a review, and subscribe. Click that subscribe button. Keep coming back for more.
Absolutely. And don't forget, folks, thank you to all our patrons that have joined us recently after my big rage and rant a few weeks ago. Yeah. But keep them coming. Don't stop. It worked. But don't stop now, folks. Don't stop now. Pop over and support this podcast. If you love this podcast, if it gives you a little bit of inspiration each week, if it keeps you going, then please do support this podcast. It's very simple. You go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. You pick a tier. It's like $1, $2, $5, $10, $50 if you want to join the BXP team, whatever it is for you, whatever you can afford. Please jump on board, and you will get tons of extra goodies, including many hours of deep dives to just feast on if you want to get even more of the Bestseller Experiment between these sessions that we do each week. And as I always say as well, if you're interested in becoming a member of the Bestseller Academy, it is currently open for new applications. So pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com and let Mark and I become your coaches. Join us for group coaching sessions on craft and life coaching, plus access to over 30 in-depth courses on how to start, finish your book. And if you're also just at this stage where you're trying to get going, it's the 200 word challenge is probably the best place for you right now. 200wordchallenge.com. See if you can beat a streak of 7 days. Just write 200 words a day for 7 days and see what happens. Let the magic unfold, folks. So, Mr. Stay, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. This beautiful weather we've got. There's so much to be grateful for in life, folks, even though there's so many awful things happening out in the world. Try to stay positive. Remember, no amount of feeling sorry for people will make a difference. Be the change. Like, do something to help the people out there in the world right now that are struggling. In fact, don't join us on Patreon this week. Put that money towards a good cause and a charity that will help people that are struggling right now. But remember, no amount of feeling sorry for people will change their world. So let's make a difference by doing some random act of kindness this week. And I send my kind of thoughts to everyone out in the world who's struggling right now for whatever it might be, whatever might be happening in your life maybe that's difficult. Hang in there. Remember, folks, favorite quote of all time: behind the clouds, the sun is still shining. Never forget that. All right, folks, it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And goodbye from Mark 2. Climb every mountain, search high and low, follow every highway, every path you know. I'm going to be sued by Rodgers and Hammerstein. Is it Rodgers and Hammerstein? Anyway, yes, goodbye, everyone. Bye. Bye.